How to create apps using ChatGPT. The new ChatGPT provides code, is lightning fast as of a recent update, and can analyze code files, even large files. One of the most useful aspects of this chatbot is the code generation, followed by its ability to troubleshoot problems for you. So let's use ChatGPT to make some code, teach us how to code in the process, whether you have coding experience or not. So in this video, I'll use ChatGPT 4 and 3.5 to help me use Kotlin, the programming language, to make an Android app, a basic Android app. In my other video, I showed you how to use ChatGPT to make a web app. In this video, I'll show you how to use ChatGPT either 3.5 or 4 to get code to make apps that you can either use for yourself or put on the App Store. In the other video, I made a very basic web app, which is essentially a website that just does something, rather than simply show static media like text and images. In this case, it simulated a distraction-free typewriter that has typewriter sounds, a typewriter font, and prints the contents of your page, including the typewriter font, to a PDF. That's it. So it's just kind of a bare bones page that doesn't do much, but the point was that it was programmed by ChatGPT. I don't have much JavaScript experience, so I needed help from the chatbot to write the code. I used some simple prompts to get it to give me an outline of the strategy for building the web app, asked it if it had any questions for me, then I told it to provide the code for each part. If there were any issues along the way, you can upload the HTML file or any other file for it to analyze for errors, or you can paste in sections where you think there might be problems. In the end, this basic website was up and running on GitHub Pages in about 2 hours, soup to nuts. But what about mobile apps and desktop apps in addition to web apps? The web app was easy enough for me, partially because I already have experience in HTML and CSS, so I knew how to get a basic website up and running. I just needed the JavaScript, which fits nicely into the script tags of a single HTML page. It could have been a separate file on my site, but GitHub Pages is best for having one basic HTML file. I recommend GitHub Pages for simple sites like this because it's free. You don't have to have your own hosting. But an Android app is another story. You have tons and tons of directories and files for the most basic app. Generated Java files, Gradle scripts, manifests, layouts. Can ChatGPT help me create an app from scratch? So let's find out. For this project, I'll be using Android Studio, taking me out of my comfort zone of Visual Studio Code and using the recommended and official integrated development environment for making Android apps. The first few steps are easy, which is to make a basic app using a built-in template. For this, I'll start with a basic template that shows a basic view activity. I chose Kotlin for the language rather than Java. Even though I have experience with Java making Android apps a little bit in the past, Kotlin is now the official language for Android app development, but it is compatible with Java. With ChatGPT, you get out what you put in. That is to say, you need to give it the right prompts and provide it with the right information to get useful answers from it. Set the prompt up at first by saying something like, "You are a senior software developer and you are my coding assistant. I want you to help me make an Android app using Android Studio programmed in Kotlin. You will provide the code and tell me what to do with it, where to put it, and how to get the app up and running. I want the app to be a simple, minimalist typewriter simulator. The user will see a page and the top of a typewriter carriage and a standard keyboard. When they type, they'll hear the sound of a typewriter key and the text will look like the typewriter font. There will be buttons for PDF printing, sound on and off, and copy, which copies the text to the clipboard. I will provide sounds, images, and fonts, and you will provide all the code and any further instructions to get the app on the app stores. First, I want a strategy and a plan of action. Then I want you to get started coding. Any questions so far?" Now right now, I'll interject here and say that some of that strategy has changed as I went, as I kept running into problems with the images. A typewriter image would not be user-friendly, so I use a standard keyboard. The chatbot will respond something like this. If you have questions, now will be the time to ask it. If you need further clarification, ask it for that. If there are any issues with the steps, let it know. For example, if you try to install Android Studio and you get errors, just paste the errors right in the text box. So I asked the chatbot a few questions as I was creating a new project, and then you get started. I created a new project in Android Studio, selecting Kotlin as the language as the chatbot instructed. I made a folder for the custom font, and I add the TTF file of the font, which is X typewriter, by the way, a nice public domain typewriter font. I added a basic image of a typewriter, which I later didn't use, and then I added sounds, which I made myself on my own typewriter. As you can see, I ran into a few snags creating the app or the views in the app. I had to go over each problem one by one with the chatbot. It takes a while, but it's 1,000 times better than trying to find answers in Stack Overflow or basically any other source on Google on the fly, just hoping that someone had the exact problem. ChatGPT is imperfect and will give you wrong code sometimes, but fixing the problems is as easy as explaining the problem to a software developer and the developer finding the solution and explaining it back to you. At one point, I tried and gave it a screenshot instead of explaining it, but it analyzed images pretty slowly, and it was just easier to explain the problem and describe any visual issues. With some back and forth with the chatbot regarding errors, building and running the app, and various parts of the Android Studio interface that I needed to navigate, things started to form and the app started to take shape. Right now, it is just an edit text view that has a typewriter font that uses the default keyboard. I wanted to make a custom typewriter keyboard and made some images, but I think that would just be a bad user experience to try to type on it, so I scrapped that idea for now. I had trouble getting the image to display anyway. So I went with just the typewriter that has the typing sounds and font and doesn't let you delete like a real typewriter. The experience with ChatGPT 4 can be very frustrating because it can be incredibly slow compared to 3.5, the free version, which is still pretty fast. It kind of makes me want to stop paying for the Plus version, but we'll see if they speed it up. Then I hit the message limit for ChatGPT model anyway. This means that if I did not have the Plus plan, I would have to find something else to do for a few hours. But because I have the Plus plan, it reverted me back to the 3.5 default. It was at this point I realized that the key sound effects were only playing when I used my real keyboard rather than the virtual emulator. It did not play for the soft keyboard, the ones that users will use. So I played with the idea of using a custom keyboard with a keyboard image. This took about a day of trying to figure out, and in the end it didn't work. Because I hooked up my regular phone, my real phone, and it turned out that the keyboard sounds were working just fine. There were plenty of issues involved with trying to complete multiple tasks, some of which were found by testing the app on the virtual tester on the virtual device. For example, the sounds were working fine when I used my actual keyboard, but using the soft keyboard it didn't work, defeating the purpose of the typewriter sounds. But I hooked up my real Android device and it worked great, sounds included. There were some problems with printing to the PDF. At first it didn't print the font, but I told the ChatGPT to fix that, and it works fine. Maneuvering around Android Studio was probably the most difficult part of this. I was accustomed to Eclipse, which had a much user-friendly UI, but that's subjective. I eventually started to settle into using Android Studio. It just takes some time. Kotlin was simple enough, very much like Java from the little bit of Java that I know. ChatGPT gives code that works, but often forgets the bigger picture, for lack of a better word. For example, it might forget that I should have the font embedded to look like a typewriter. It also remembers most of the conversation to an extent, but forgets things seemingly at random. Sometimes you have to remind it, show a code that it had produced itself earlier. In the end, I have this barely useful app that lets you type but does not let you delete, just like a typewriter, forcing you to choose your words wisely. Fun for the whole family. But this was really just practice to see if I can use ChatGPT to make an Android app in Kotlin with no experience in Kotlin whatsoever, and some minimal experience in Android Studio. There were some speed bumps, but overall it was a success. It took me about 2 days to get this basic app made, mostly because of errors along the way, some misunderstanding on my part, some miscommunication with the chatbot. I don't really fault ChatGPT for these problems. Most of the time, it was my own issues. Very detailed prompts with the correct information is essential, and it also pays to have a basic understanding of the tools and platforms you'll be using because the ChatGPT can make mistakes and so can you. And plus it will take some time if you don't understand how to use the software, because you'll have to ask the chatbot how to do basic stuff. So for now, ChatGPT can write code, usually in small snippets at a time, but you can take them and build something with them. You can take them and put them into apps on software like Android Studio to make an app. It cannot make a full app as of yet, as far as I know, but with a little time you can take the code and then build something bigger with it. Hopefully you'll learn something in the process. Making mistakes and encountering errors is frustrating while it's happening, but it does force you to learn. You don't make the same mistakes the next time, and you slowly get the hang of the programming language and the platforms. The main thing should be that you learn how to do this, thanks to ChatGPT. The ChatGPT is just a tool like Google or Stack Overflow or any other help platform with tutorials. You can use the tool to help you make something. In this case, a basic Kotlin app for the Android platform. So hopefully I was able to help you in some way. This video showed you how to use ChatGPT to get code and make an Android app. In the future, let's make some games or something more useful. Until then, subscribe for more tech news and tips, and I'll see you next time.